Hello, welcome to the LSE's series of short videos on influencing. My name is Duncan Green, and today I'm going to talk about research for impact. So this is something that researchers around the world are thinking about, seeking, and wondering how to do better. And I think there's a few ideas which might help. So the aim here is to help you understand the system that your research is entering, and then to understand the importance of relationships, timing, narrative, and messengers in terms of getting your research into the public domain and making sure it actually influences that system. So I'm going to talk about 4 paths to research impact: understanding the system, thinking about framing and timing, thinking about voice, and the importance of relationships. Now, researchers typically are interested in a problem, trying to understand and explain that problem, and possibly the solutions that could ease that problem. That's kind of fairly straightforward. Sometimes they go on to thinking about decision making. What are the decisions that created the problem or prevented being solved? Who are the players who actually do that? This is where we become slightly less mainstream in the research. Then identifying who has the power and capabilities to achieve change and who and what influences them. So if you're arguing for a change in policy, who makes that decision and who do they listen to? It may not be the public. It may not be even their colleagues in a political system. It may be their old professor at university. It may be their religious leader. These are the questions that actually should matter to you as a researcher. And then what are the wider system influences and contextual opportunities? When is an election coming up? When is a change of leadership coming up? Is this crisis that seems to be brewing a potential window of opportunity where your research ideas might get better uptake? So you're needing to think like an influencer, like an activist, not just like somebody who's getting to the causes of things. You need to think about how you're going to change the world. Now, your stakeholder mapping can help shape the research that you use. This is something I did we did in an earlier video, but when you do a stakeholder mapping on these axes of powerful versus less powerful and supportive versus less versus opposed, you get clusters. And the kind of research that will work for those players depends on which cluster they're in. So in Group A, these are highly influential players, decision makers, or people in positions of power, and they support your issue. They want to do what you want to do. You don't need to convince them. So what they need is researchers' ammunition, killer facts that they can put in their speech, summaries of the problem, powerful arguments, or use research as a way of getting a conversation going with a wider range of players. Research is a wonderfully neutral, inclusive thing which can bring people into the room in a non-confrontational way. So there's different uses for research in that top right-hand corner. The bottom right-hand corner are people who support your issue but are low influence. And then you can do research in order to build their confidence. They can say, look, the LSE or whoever it is has published this paper which says that we are right. And that's a really important thing that can validate people's kind of lived experience, felt concerns. The people in C are a crucial target for research. High influence, low support, maybe not opposed, but just like there are so many issues, so many priorities, they are not picking up the one that you want to work on. And then you need to think about, okay, I'm doing my research, but what will actually persuade them to read it? They have no time. They are busy. They are being bombarded with messages by people like me who are working on 100 other issues. That what matters there is the messenger. Who's going to take that message to them in such a way that they might actually read it? And when? Is it best to do it when there's a crisis? When there's a crisis, how do I dust off my old research and get it to the decision makers? Because now they might actually listen. And then Group D, which are powerful but opposed, can my research make them look less legitimate, peel off some of their supporters, show the public that they are wrong? These are just some of the ways that the kind of research you do and the narrative of your research should be reflected, should be based upon where people are on the stakeholder map. Timing really matters. And this is a thing called the policy funnel, which I stole from somebody called Michael Jacobs, an environmental academic. And it shows that issues change over time. They start off as big concepts which no one's really talking about. And there the research is to say this is an important issue of public interest. We need to talk about climate change adaptation in the early 2000s, for example. If that succeeds in becoming an issue of public debate, it starts to become captured in proposals for legislation, proposals for policies, and you start getting into text and then into the spending of money and political capital on getting these things to happen. And at this point, the room for maneuver falls and the number of players increases. And as a researcher, you have to know who these players are and where you can fit in to that discussion. So in some ways, it's easiest at the left-hand side when there are fewer players, but then many of those issues you raise will never make it into the policy funnel. So this is the trade-off of being a visionary versus being a pragmatist. At the other end, at the right-hand side, you've got implementation. And there's a big role for policy and for research, in particular, in saying which kinds of implementation are working, are they having unintended consequences? And that's, again, something where research can make a big difference. Bit more on timing. If you get in early, you can have a lot more influence. So Kate, who I mentioned on a previous video, Kate Rayworth, did very well because she was one of the first people to come up with a global number for the amount of money that was needed for climate change adaptation. If you do that when no one else has done it, it gets picked up and gets fantastic impact. So think about getting into debates early, not waiting until everything is clarified. Plan around the political timetable. Political parties, for example, want things for at some points of the political cycle and not at others. They typically want new ideas for manifestos or when there's a political crisis. That could be an external shock like a financial crisis or an internal shock like a scandal. And here are some of the ones that have provided real windows of opportunity for researchers to raise issues. And I think this is an important thing that you mustn't get too hung up on your research pipeline. You've got to see what's going on in the world around you. How do you disseminate your findings? I think publishing drafts is a really good idea. Asking for comments, it starts to sort of socialize your work, gets people interested. Some people prefer to read drafts. Executive summaries need to be a summary. Not the longest I ever read in Oxfam was 68 pages, which is just like throwing the paper in the bin. A 2-page summary, and then increasingly multimedia. Everybody uses a different platform. You have to use them all if you've got time, or find people who can. Think about partnerships with non-academics. For example, a lot of academics are quite introverted. They don't like building networks and going up to people and grabbing them at conferences and say, can I tell you about my big idea? But there are people, believe it or not, who do like doing that. They sometimes work for think tanks or for NGOs. So those are the partnerships that can bring networks and comm skills, but also antennae for opportunities. You bring the objectivity, the rigor, the brand. So there's a complementarity there. But there are lots of obstacles. This is not easy stuff. I've really struggled with these kind of partnerships over the years from both sides of the aisle. The language is different. The respect is not always there. The timescale is different. Researchers tend to have a much longer timescale than activists. There tends to be a mutual lack of respect. So be very cautious and careful about choosing partners. It's not a simple thing. Final tips: relationships, relationships, relationships. And if you're shy, find someone else who's got the relationships. Killer facts and graphics. Here are some of the ones from Oxfam which have made a big splash, like the one on inequality, comparing the wealth of the richest people with the poorest half of the world's population. League tables, indices. There's a whole bunch of stuff in an Oxfam reflection paper that I helped write on its own lessons of research for impact. These are worth absorbing. They may not be for you, but you should know they exist.